Welcome to Season 2 of Feeding Families on the EcoParent Podcast Network. And don't forget to check out the new season of our other top podcast, Raising Kids Naturally. But before diving into this episode, a little shameless self-promotion from my son.
My dad started EcoParent when I was in the womb. Now it's pretty much the only parenting magazine still in print. If you like the podcast, you'll probably like the magazine too. You can subscribe online. You might also be interested in EcoParent's online courses, especially the kids nutrition and kids wellness courses. Stick around until the end of the episode and my dad will give you a discount code. Enjoy the show.
Hey parents, this episode of the Feeding Families podcast is being brought to you by the Canadian School of Natural Nutrition. Whether you're looking to learn a little more about nutrition, health, and wellness, or pick up a few new recipes and cooking tips, or start a career as a holistic nutrition practitioner, there's something for everyone at CSNN. The Natural Nutrition Diploma Program is the flagship program that earns you a professional designation and title. If you just want to dip your toe in, there's the Healthy Eating and Lifestyle Certificate, the Holistic Culinary Certificate, or the Introduction to Natural Nutrition Certificate. For healthcare practitioners, CSNN offers advanced holistic nutrition workshops and certificate packages. With part-time and full-time schedules and flexible learning formats, including live online classes, there's truly something for everyone looking to improve the overall health and well-being of their family with holistic nutrition. Learn more at csnn.ca/holistic-family or follow the links in the show notes. The Feeding Families podcast is all about food and nutrition for kids. We bring you new ideas and inspiration for your kitchen and answers to your food questions to help you overcome the very real, very frustrating food-related challenges so many parents are trying to figure out. I'm your host, Jess Sherman, family wellness educator, author, practitioner of functional and holistic nutrition, and mother. I want you to develop unwavering confidence in the choices you make every day. So let's get into Feeding Families. Hi again, families, and welcome back to the Feeding Families podcast. I am always just so tickled when people tune in and when I am able to bring awesome people to other people. I really love connecting people. And the person that I have here today with me, Jessie Thomas, I think you're going to find quite delightful and very inspiring. Partly because I do, but also partly because she's just a great person. And what we're going to talk about today is we're just going to have kind of a casual conversation, mom to mom. Both of us have, qualifications and training, and, Jessie is an athlete and she is a nutritionist and she is a health coach and she works with clients. But really, we are just going to have a conversation mom to mom as women who value nutrition, are trying to raise a family, trying to be really practical with our pocketbooks and with our food choices and, just make it happen, but not be too stressed about it. I think that's why we like each other so much. Hey, Jessie.
I think that's it. You got it.
Yeah. So that's why I think people are going to find it inspiring because, you're listening to a podcast called Feeding Families. So obviously, food is important. You know that nourishing our kids is important, but, learning stuff and doing stuff are two very different things. And so we got to be practical about what we're doing. And life is getting busier and more expensive and complicated. And, if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you know that I'm really an advocate of going simple and just getting back to the basics and remembering what's important. The entire theme of season 2 is around how we nourish our kids in various ways. It's not just about food. But I'm hoping that what people are getting from that is not like, oh gosh, now I've got more things I need to do. It's not so much that. It's just that there are so many aspects to how we nourish our kids, and they're all important. And so we do some of them well, and we do some of them not so well, and some fall off the plate, but then we can focus on others. And then you can remember, oh yeah, I think we need to do this a little bit more. Like parenting is just it's a journey. It is not a one and done. We're never done. We get on this treadmill and then we start to learn all this stuff. And then thank you for coming, Jessie. That's my introduction to you.
I just love it. I love everything you just said there. And so many things plucked my mind as you were talking because you're so right. And I was thinking about like how did I get here? How did I get into this space? Because it wasn't, I guess it wasn't like the typical journey that you hear about so often with people in the health and wellness space of where, maybe they had their own health problem and they were looking for solutions, which that is absolutely part of my story. But I think it's really bizarre. And I think that a lot of times people look at me and they think, oh, she just must love to cook and be in the kitchen. And I can't begin to tell you how much I absolutely don't.
Oh, another thing that we relate. I don't really like cooking either. It's so interesting.
I know, I know. But a part of my story is that I had the experience of having a very significant, I wouldn't say life threatening, but life altering health problem where I was being exposed to chemicals unaware. I was my parents were working class. My parents had to work. They were busy all the time. I had my own job starting at age 13. And one of the jobs I had was working at a tree nursery where I was right smack dab next to a cornfield that was, BT the genetically modified corn that's being sprayed with glyphosate and whoever knows what else. And so I was directly exposed in that environment to those chemicals. It got sprayed on my skin. I was touching it, all of the things that we took for granted way back when. But I have genetic snippets that everybody's talking about right now, the MTHFR gene, which if you want to talk about that, I'm happy to talk about that because I think sometimes people hear that and they hit panic mode. And I think it's an important part of a lot of people's stories that maybe they don't even know about. But in high school, as I was working this job, I was experiencing fatigue, brain fog, joint pain, chronic injuries, acne, all this stuff that would be synonymous with an autoimmune disease. And at the same time I'm working this job, I got another job working in a restaurant where a physician had quit her practice. And this is in the 90s in Idaho. And nobody's talking about the connection between food and health really in a mainstream way. I got a chance to work in this restaurant where this physician had quit her practice to open up a restaurant that worked specifically on giving people food and information about how to use the food to treat chronic disease. And in that time, I got exposed and I got to sit through lectures from other physicians talking about chronic inflammation. I mean, nobody was talking about those things then. If you go to the doctor's office and said, I have chronic inflammation, they would have looked at you like you're a Looney Tune. And so I got to hear all of this, but more importantly, I got to experience this. And I do not know to this day, I've since found out that she's passed away. I've tried to find her again, but she was growing this food in her own backyard. And she was bringing in fresh carrots and she was bringing in fresh greens that we would work with and cook with and juice with. And so that whole experience helped me understand what it meant to feel good for the first time in a very long time, to have energy, mental clarity, drive, all the things I felt were kind of slowly but surely dwindling away. And going to the physician's office with those problems resulted in an antidepressant, a birth control pill, Accutane, and iron pills to sort of solve these one single symptoms, but not really getting to the root. And I didn't really even know that this food was working on me in that way until I left. I left that job. I moved on to other jobs and I worked in jobs that were very non-traditional for women. I was a firefighter for a long time. I was a smoke jumper. I got to go smoke jump up in Canada, which was so fun. And then I had my own children, and that whole kind of juxtaposition of becoming working in this very non-traditional field, feeling very important and having all these accolades for doing work that's women don't normally do, and everyone's high-fiving you and patting you on the back. And then I have kids and nobody's high-fiving you or patting you on the back, and my understanding through my lived experience of being a mother was that there was no more important work to do. There was no more significant job than that, and nobody cared. And so I just thought that was so weird. But the stress of all of that big change and the shifting around really kind of threw me back into that tailspin of feeling fatigued, brain fogged, achy joints, all of the things. And I was like, what the heck is going on here? And so long story short, I had to wind back up into the space of nutrition, recalling upon my experience earlier in life as a way. I mean, to me, it was like, this is the most powerful tool moving forward, not just with my health, but with the kind of future and world I wanted to create for my kids. I think that is something that moms, I think we can forget in all of the stressors that we're dealing with, is that we are, boring daily actions that we take are what is creating the environment that we live in our homes, but the future that our kids are going to inherit. And it happens through purchases mostly, and it happens through how we interact with our kids and what we put a value on and how we inform our kids about what matters. And I think for us, it's hard to remember what matters in the world that we live in, because our attention is pulled in every direction that could possibly be.
Yeah. 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 We have a kind of similar story. I mean, I didn't have such a health crash, but I did feel come to this like, oh, this is really important shortly after I had children. Like I had always been interested in it, but then I had the kids and I was like, "Oh, wait a second. Like how do I keep them healthy? How do I recover from pregnancy?" And there was very little guidance around that, and very little. It's just like, "Well, you just carry on. You get childcare and you just kind of go forth." And and I was like, "Wait, what?" It really caused me to pause. And one of the things I want to pick up on that you just said is this idea that food, it has a massive influence on how we feel, but we're not always going to get it right. We're not always going to do it right. It has an influence on how our kids feel too, right? But it's not always going to be center stage. Like for you, you had this time when you're like, "Oh, okay, this is going to be center stage for me." And you felt great because of that. And then stuff happened and you start doing other things and you start slowly not feeling as good, but you had that learned memory of, wait, I can feel better. I just need to make some different choices, right? And I think that's very typical. I think that's very common, and even in our families, like there's times when I'm like, oh, we have not been eating well. Like, okay, let's get back into it, because sports and things and busy and
Yeah. I mean, I think for us, my kids, I have a sixth grader and a third grader, so I still have a pretty I don't know, a pretty strong span of control in terms of what comes into the environment. But, I've got a sixth grader who's in middle school, and they, sell fire Cheetos and Takis and all of the things at school as a reward for something, whatever it is. And so I have to kind of look at it like, this is my home. This is where the boundary is drawn. And what comes in here is what, I know promotes the foundations of health and wellness. And what happens out there, I'm going to just let that be. But something important that my daughter and I have been working on, because I think this is the trickiest, hands down, the trickiest part of parenting for most people, is that how do you get your kids to make choices when they're on their own and they have free will to choose? And I've really spent a lot of time educating myself about our why we do the things that we do. It's not just about following rules and this food is good and this food is bad. It's more of just like, why are we making these choices, and then informing them. But more importantly, because my daughter's going through puberty, there's an extra stress load on her body. And so now she has, the stressors of developing an endocrine system, which is just a natural stressor. And then the stressors that she kind of creates through eating things that don't work for the gut microbiome, anybody's gut microbiome. And now she's having this opportunity to experience consequences associated with her choices. And because I've spent so much time in this space educating myself about what the consequences are of high fructose corn syrup on the gut microbiome, or gluten in a lot of people's world, or dairy, we talk about these things. And she's seeing now just yesterday. She's like, oh my gosh, mom, look. She's like, I had gluten like 2 days ago and I am seeing eczema pop up on my skin. And I was like, and how's that going? I mean, like, I'm not like, I can see how if I got in there and was like, you can't do that, it would just create a wedge between us. And the most important thing is my relationship with my kids over, what we're doing perfectly well. And so it's more of just like, okay, well, you notice that now and you get to decide. But also, I think the other important thing is she can really notice how elevated her mood is in a negative way, how anxious she becomes when she eats, gluten, or when she has high fructose corn syrup. She can really draw the connection there. And that's winning. I mean, we scored. Like she understands what happens with her body. She knows what happens when she has X, Y, or Z input. And then she's informed to make those choices. Is that worth it to you? And at home, I mean, I've heard you say this before. At home, I have a relationship with her. So she'll talk through some of the things that she's like noticing with herself. And I don't get in heavy-handed. I don't say, don't do that. You can't do that. Here's rules. It's more of just like, okay, well, we notice this now. And because this is happening inside of your body, we're going to implement these things at home to help you recover, because this is kind of like a little internal injury. And she gets it. Like, she's getting it. And I'm just like, high five me. And I think that like all of those things that we have happen are like the most important things that happen in a child's experience growing up. Just being informed about making choices, being consumers, because they're going to be consumers one day themselves. They're going to be fully in charge of their own body one day themselves. And it's the whole process right now is about setting them up for success later. It's not about what's happening in the minute. It's like, okay, how is this going to all end up in the future? So I feel very excited about the fact that she's drawing these conclusions herself. Whether she does it perfectly or executes these perfectly is not really the important thing. It's just more that she's learning herself, and then she's going to make choices with that information later.
Yeah, yeah, and it's like when you oh, there's so much that you just said that I love. It's really that's our parenting job. Like that's what we're here to do. We're here to keep them safe and healthy until they can do that themselves. And we can't expect them to keep themselves healthy if there's not an education process, if there's not a curiosity about your body and how to keep it healthy and optimized. And isn't it amazing when our bodies give us feedback? Isn't it amazing, right? Like you could easily see that eczema pop up, like you say, and be like, oh, well, that was a dumb decision, wasn't it? Right. Or you could say, isn't that amazing that your body is giving you that feedback? What are you going to do next time? Right.
Well, and I mean, honestly, I think it was amazing. I was like, this is just, and that she brought it to my attention. She's like, look at this. She's like, 2 or 3 days ago, I had gluten and now look at this. And I was like, yeah, isn't that crazy? And I mean, it's just so encouraging, and it feels like a win. And, I just see a lot of really good parents out there wasting energy trying to like control all these things.
Yeah, control. If we could, I think if we were to replace our efforts of control with our efforts at getting curious, I think it just takes the edge off of our stress, right? If we're trying to control, don't eat that. No, we can't buy that. Oh, no. Versus like, oh, well, let's see what happens. Or isn't that interesting? Or wow, your body's really talking to you right now, isn't it? It lightens the mood and it eases our own stress. And we have to be so spectacularly, efficient with our stress management and all of the things that we try to do, right? So I think that's a huge parenting win when you can do that.
Yeah, and I mean, I've been really clear about my daughter with her that I'm willing to help you through life stressors. I'm willing to sit there and listen to you while things are hard. I'm not super motivated to do that when you have been making choices that create situations where you're just elevated all the time. Like, that's not an interesting or compelling use of my time. I'm being just really authentic and genuine with her. Like, if I have to sit there with you at bedtime for an hour while you work through all this anxiety because you decided that you were going to eat the Pop Tart, like, that just isn't that. I mean, you're putting that in my lap and I don't want it. And so it's not a boundary, but it's just a standard I set for myself because I need sleep. I need to not feel concerned and worried about my kids more than I already am, like just inherently as a parent. And so it's just a way of kind of managing the environment in the house and letting them be a part of the process, but being very clear with them about like, this is where the line is at for me. I go to bed at 10 o'clock at night so that I can get 7 or 8 hours of sleep. And that's how we are doing this here so that I can show up and be available for you in a really good way. And that's my expectation. If you decide to eat food that doesn't agree with your physiology and it creates anxiety, which we've already talked about, we've already laid the groundwork down of how that works.
That's important. Yeah, that's important, that piece. Like they have to already know that and have learned that lesson. You're just reinforcing.
And you have to know it yourself, but I think that's kind of where, everybody's kind of in their own part of the journey on discovery of like trying to figure out, because I think people really don't want to believe that certain foods create certain conditions. They don't want to believe there's a connection there because then they would have to face giving that up, which is a whole box of things. It can be a whole box of things for people. So they don't want to face it. They don't want to look at it. And I mean, I can relate to that. I know what that's like a little bit. And there have been things I have given up that I didn't want to believe were creating conditions in my body. But when I did, and I got rid of them, I was like back in that place again where I was a young adult and experiencing a newfound sense of energy and mental clarity that feels so good. You don't want to go back. And when you do go back, you're like, oh, ew, God, no. Whatever it is. And I think for my family, I think one of the things that gets so interesting for me with my daughter making these decisions and experiencing the consequences is that it is truly fascinating how stressors influence our genetic expression. And I look at it from that standpoint and think, oh, well, that's how that comes out on you. For me, it comes out a different way. For me, I deal with a little more neuroinflammation, a little bit more joint pain, a little bit more things like that, not necessarily the eczema piece. So it's been an interesting thing. And I really do look at it as this is fascinating. Like, this is how your genes, under this kind of pressure, express themselves. Like, it's cool.
Yeah, it is. It is so cool. I had Jen Pike was on our podcast last year, and we were talking about hormones and kids going through puberty while we're going through perimenopause, and what a what a weird thing that is. But I think with every challenge there's an opportunity, right? And so even that's also great feedback for them when they're going through puberty. It's a time, like you mentioned, is like it's another stressor. Their body is really, really changing, and it's giving them feedback all the time, as is ours when we're going through perimenopause or whatever is going on in our body. And these are great opportunities to tune in and to teach. But I think your language was really important. I wanted to just pull that out because when you were talking about how you talk to your daughter about when she makes bad choices and she feels terrible and you set that boundary, the way you described it was with full compassion and love versus what you could say, which is, why do you do this to yourself? you know, that was stupid. Or, whatever. It triggers us because we were spending so much time like educating and nourishing and loving our children. And then they go and they eat the Takis and we're like, oh my gosh. It's very triggering, I think, to our heartstrings. But it's also a great opportunity if you approach it with curiosity and you kind of let go of your own baggage around it. So I just wanted to sort of pull that out, that you can still set those boundaries in a very compassionate way, that they know you're still there. They know that you love them. It doesn't, because food can cause so much stress, right, in a family, and food can be stress, but food can cause stress. And like, you've taken out all the sugar and the gluten and the blah, 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 but you've replaced it with all of this stress, and you're no further ahead with your net stress load. So I just wanted to highlight your language around that. It was very, very positive and compassionate.
Yeah. And to be clear to any listener out there, I have wanted to twist my children's heads off I mean, my I've wanted to do that, but I haven't done that because, it does require working through your own stuff. And that, I mean, I feel like that's the call of parenting, is that you have to heal your own childhood while you're raising children. And I think that's something that gets missed pretty often. And it isn't easy work to do or fun. It's not like I want to roll my sleeves up and bring up the bad memories of my childhood that make me want to rip my kids' heads off. But it is so important, and it does help us manage that stress load so that we can come to the table and be responding freshly to their issues versus reaching back into the old bag of trauma and pulling out some response that our parents gave us of like, I'll give you something to cry about sort of, vibe. And but it has required work, and it isn't just like a gimme. And I think, like so many parents, if I ever ask a question on Instagram on a story slide and say, hey, what's one thing that you, an example, one thing that you wish or want to know about feeding kids? And oh my God, the responses are kind of a lot. And so I don't ask it because I don't really work with kids. In fact, I don't. And so I work with parents, I work with moms, because it to me is something I feel it's much easier for me to feel comfortable doing that. But the responses are overwhelming, and just the amount of real estate that this takes up in people's heads is a lot. And I think people have to stop. I mean, I think it's the amount of stress that it causes is the direct reason why people don't make changes, because it's like facing the dragon that they want to avoid. And we like to avoid pain because we're mammals. But we have to kind of turn into it and lean into it a little bit and unpack it a little bit so that, again, we can show up and, like I said earlier, kind of start to create the future for our kids that we want. And it goes back to these mundane daily decisions that for a lot of people we just try to avoid. We just don't want to put attention on it. We don't want to think about it. We just go to Costco and buy the big giant bags of things and put them in our freezer, and we're just like, okay, I'm gonna cook these pizza rolls. We just kind of take food and we don't value and cherish it for what it does for us, because there are things that we just don't want to look at. And when we turn into the things we don't want to look at, we actually take a peek at them. And it's not just like you do that by yourself and you just look, at these really hard issues and you just white knuckle it. Because I mean, I have family members from Canada, and I don't think that the US and Canada are super different. And I live in the Intermountain West, and everybody here is like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, do it by yourself. You've got to be tough and strong. And I just don't think I don't think it's not serving moms very well. And so when you can find community of people, or even just a person who can help you sort through the places where you feel like you get stuck, winning, that's the process. It's not just like, well, I've decided we're not having dino nuggets anymore, and so we just aren't, and there, we've made the decision, we're not. And it's like, it doesn't work like that. There's a whole lot of things you have to work through your own stuff so that you can help your kids work through the emotional issues that are inevitable when you make a change to something that's a more, I don't want to say healthy because I hate that word. I think it's just kind of like irresponsibly used, but a version of food that's more fit for your biology.
I think you're kind of speaking to the culture. You're right. It's like, which is really the whole overarching theme of our season, which is you have control over the culture of nourishment that you create in your home, or the culture, whatever the culture is. I'm highly encouraging people to create a culture of nourishment. You don't necessarily have a culture, like you don't have total control of the culture out there, but the more of us who choose nourishment as a guiding theme for our families in our own little homes, the better that permeates, the more that permeates out. And I know one of the things you're really passionate about is connecting people with sustainable food choices, and how we are agents of change for our own bodies, which is really what we've been talking about. But we're also agents of change in the culture at large, even though sometimes we don't feel like we are. Like, oh, I'm just a drop in the bucket. But, the more of us who are having this conversation, the more of us who are like, wait, no, No, that shouldn't be in the school. No, we shouldn't be putting that in our bodies. And we're teaching our kids that. And then our kids are starting to be like, what? Wait, why am I, what? Um, or even having conversations like, why does this taste so good and I can't put down the bag? Let's look at the ingredients and see how much actual food is in there. So we can have these conversations with our kids, and by doing so, we're actually being kind of revolutionaries a little bit. You think?
100%. Absolutely. I mean, we're being rebels. We are being rebels. We're bucking the trend of chronic disease with our children when we step into that role.
It's so powerful. I don't think we can underestimate how powerful that is and how important it is. And also what you and I were talking about before we started recording, which is that it is being led by women mostly. And that might be why it feels so hard, because of all of the we can get into gender politics, but in our role as the chief nourishers of our families, if it is, sometimes it's not women, but sometimes, dads take the reins on that. But I'd say like 95% of the people who come to see me to learn more about nutrition are women. They want to know how to feed their families and keep them healthy. It's kind of, I don't know if it's part of our biology or what, but it falls on our shoulders more often. And man, that's a powerful role if we choose to step into our authority on it.
It absolutely is a part of our biology. I mean, think about it. Okay, so we get these tiny little cluster of cells that are multiplying and dividing, and all of a sudden it's a human with a heartbeat and a brain, and it's in our bodies, And then the baby's born, and we are the food source for most women. That's the case, and we're nurturing and feeding. We're understanding that what we eat affects how, the breast milk and how that translates to them. And then they go to preschool and it's goldfish crackers, and kindergarten it's Pop-Tarts and goldfish crackers, and so on and so forth. And we can obviously see the disconnect and the dichotomy there. And it is biological. I think that women are drawn to this because it's like, it's ancestrally, since the dawn of civilization, it's been women's role to gather the food, to feed the community. And what I see happening, not just within the homes, mothers seeking out different solutions to health problems and using their kitchen as the primary source of executing that plan, but I also see women in agriculture leading the charge on changing the way we grow food. And I am like here for that. And I just have had a conversation recently with a woman who's a rancher. She's got her whole family in tow. She's got 3 little kids, and she's raising beef. And there's so many aspects to it that are important. But for me, I'm like, this is who I'm arm in arm with and moving forward. I cannot uncouple myself from my gut instincts in the acknowledging how important it is. We can break down biochemistry, and we can look at like nutrient density and different growing practices and different animals and different plants and all these things, but it is not just about that. It's about a relationship that I get to have with these people who, in my opinion, are fighting the same fight that I am fighting for my kids. And I think, well, okay, settled in. This is where I'm supposed to be right now, and this is what I'm doing. And I wake up in the morning and it gets me out of bed, and it's compelling. I think that being middle-aged has put me in a position to ask those questions a lot more of myself, of like, what am I doing? Is this what I want to be doing? Where am I spending my time and energy that's feeling more and more limited these days? And to me, I'm like, this is it. I want to connect not just people to the people raising food, like people in a community and people raising food, but I want to connect health outcomes and the food together, like create a system where, we don't have to scratch our heads and wonder why people are sick all the time. Just yesterday, I believe it was the USDA and the FDA met here in America, and they were talking about the role ultra-processed foods play in the epidemic of obesity. And the unanimous conclusion that this group of people came to was that they will need to do more research to basically verify that this was true and define a plan of action forward. And I was like, that's it, you guys. It is me and you and the people raising food. We are the heroes of the next generation. And it just requires learning, it requires teaching, and it requires doing. And those are things that just cannot be replaced. I don't care no politician is speaking truth into this situation besides one who can't even get on the ballot. So I'm like, okay, fine. Looks like we're going to keep doing bad ideas. So I just got to forge ahead, and I can't be bogged down waiting for somebody to make a decision that's going to impact public policy.
Yeah. Let's wait for some more research. Anybody who works with food, anybody who works with children, anybody who works in education has seen what's been going on. Even anyone who works in the medical system.
Well, I was going to say, and just to make sure that we're all encompassing here, obesity is one problem associated with ultra processed food. One problem. But there are thousands of problems associated with ultra processed foods that create pain points for every single one of us. The environment, mental health, everything, the economy, all of it. It's a multifaceted problem that's got one solution, two solutions: changing public policy, but also, tobacco industry put everything on the shoulders of the individual. They said, oh, hey, if you don't want to be addicted to this, just don't use it that much, even though we make it incredibly addictive. And it took, it really was the only way that tobacco changed is that there were ads that came out that educated people away from tobacco. And that influenced the next generation. That next generation voted. And that's the only way that public policy is going to change, but we can't wait for that. We've got to individually decide that it matters enough that I'm voting every day of my life with where I put my money and what I put on the end of my fork. And people at the beginning of the pandemic, I'm sorry, I feel like I'm kind of going on a tirade here, but I just have to say this. At the beginning of the pandemic, once I finally kind of understood a little bit more about what COVID-19 was about, who was being affected mostly, and why, I got all in on, well, this is only going to change if people start taking better care of their bodies and sourcing different food. And just was also watching this consolidation of power and wealth on the global level. And that made me literally shake in my boots. I'm not kidding. Like, I would wake up at night sweating and shaking and was just like, oh my God, like it had to just come through me. I was like, this is the end of the world. If we do not understand this, this is the end of the world for what I want for my kids. And so I started to speak up a lot about the importance of nutrition and nutrient density and growing practices that relate to both of those things. And I got attacked, like so attacked on Instagram, in my comments, in my DMs. And then I was like, it kind of affected me at first, but then I was like, you know what? Screw you. This platform is owned by shareholders who have absolutely no interest in changing the status quo. And they are going to send trolls to me who's speaking truth to power. And you know what? If I catch a little bit of flack for this, bring it on, because I'm ready. I'm just not the kind of person to be like, oh, I really see this important solution, but I'm not going to say anything because I just don't want to ruffle any feathers. And I think we all kind of have that in us. It's just like finding the chute that you can make it through where you feel empowered to like step forward and speak up. I've tried at the public schools to like weigh in and not in a destructive way, but in a more like supportive, like, hey, I'm here to help. I understand. I worked in public schools. You worked in Canadian schools. You know how underfunded it all is. And I just couldn't get to a yes. I couldn't even get my foot in the door. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so deflating, but it's not going to stop me. I'm still going to say the things. I'm still going to find the places where I can get the yes, where I can like get my foot in there and say the things that matter to the people who need to hear it. I don't know like what that means, but every day is a new process of figuring that out.
Are you looking for a hands-on, nature-based education that lets students experience their learning on multiple levels? For more than 45 years, Oak Meadow has been supporting families as a leader and pioneer in homeschooling and distance education, creating rewarding educational experiences that fit your family's unique needs and goals. Their secular, book-based curriculum can be used independently by homeschoolers or through enrollment in their teacher-supported distance learning school. Discover the high-quality, child-centered learning materials you need to give your student a happy, harmonious educational experience at oakmeadow.com.
I think each of us, once we start to learn about the impact of food and the impact of nutrition, especially when it comes to our children, because we care about them so deeply, and on so many levels, there is a level of frustration. I see this in all of the parents that I work with. There is a, okay, but why is this even allowed? Like, how come this is even happening? So there, and I think some people will feel the need to, get on a pulpit and talk about it, or start to, get political about it. And some people won't. What I encourage everyone to recognize is the influence that you have over your children. And sometimes it feels like they're running the show in the family, right? Because they won't eat it, or they're making certain demands, or what have you. And very, there's a lot of power dynamics within families. But ultimately, you are the CEO. You are the leader of your family, and and your parenting partner, if there is one. You get to call the shots. You get to make the decisions. And how you make those decisions is going to depend on the age of your children, and, but your budgets and all of the things. But you do have some choices around what you feed your family, even though sometimes it feels like you don't, because it feels like, they're in control. So it's just something to ruminate on, I think, and something to think about. And when you're saying you're really feeling really called to, like, get out there and spread the message, if people are feeling that, then power to them, and it's amazing. And there will be pushback and there will be fire, because you are battling big forces. But if you don't feel called for that, just making little changes in your home so that you can have those curiosity conversations with your kids, and helping them become their own agents of change, and feeling the impact of what they put in their bodies, on their bodies, that is massive, not to be underestimated.
No, and to be clear, I'm not speaking to politicians anymore. I mean, I don't have the energy to waste. It's a waste of my energy. But I am talking to families. I am talking to people. I'm talking to moms. I am connecting them with local farmers and ranchers, because that to me is like the most powerful solution, in my opinion.
I feel like with all of the way the world is going right now, it's very stressful and crazy. But if we can keep knowledgeable, passionate farmers on the land, I think we'll be okay.
Oh my God. I think you're totally right. And I live in Montana, where we've got this wonderful show called Yellowstone, which is basically like selling out our entire state. And so these farmers and ranchers who are making, I don't know, probably less than $23,000 a year, who are in massive debt, who have children that have seen the stress on their parents, as farmers and ranchers, who do not want to come back to the family farm to ranch or to farm, and they're leaving, and this land is now being sold to people who want to own little ranchettes on quarter acres and have grass and walking paths. This is happening right now as we speak, within 10 miles of me. It's all over the places, it's all over the state. And that's significant, because we've got this entire conversation going on about climate change that we all can kind of sense is manipulative and a bit off, because now we've got these subsidiaries of ExxonMobil and all these gas and oil industries that are creating these artificial solutions to climate change, as in they're like literally making chambers underground to put carbon. Oh my God. If you have if you have intact grasslands with healthy grass, native grasses, which so many ranchers around here are doing, you have the capacity to draw carbon down the way it's supposed to be drawn down, through soil systems. And the impact that has on airsheds and watersheds and whole ecosystems is so compelling to me. I just can't see it differently. And I really want to, I really just want everybody to know about it, so that they feel as inspired by what's happening right in their communities as I do, and to really put their shoulder into just shopping there. Just that's all you have to do. Just shop there, get to know them, be on the same team.
Yeah, yeah. Getting to know food growers is really, if you have the opportunity, really insightful. Even just going to farmers markets and chit chatting, like, just talking with people who are working the land. The knowledge in those brains and in those hands and in those bodies is so critical for our survival as a species. And if we don't support them by buying their products, they're not going to be able to do what they do, right? So it's really really important. And I don't want to leave this episode without talking about budget, because local quality farm raised food can feel expensive. And you can't go with your big shopping cart to the farm usually and get everything you need in one spot. So, we've got an energy budget, we've got a money budget, and we want to make sustainable, healthy choices, good choices for our kids, good choices for our bodies, good choices for the planet. And a lot of us mean well, but at the end of the day, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm just going to go to Costco, or I'm just going to go to one place, my big grocery store, or what have you. And I do that too. I totally do that. So let's just spend a few minutes talking about, I mean, clearly the value is there, and there's lots of reasons to shop locally and all of the things. But let's just talk about some ways of making it budget friendly from a time perspective and from a money perspective. What do you have top tips of things that you do? And I'll share some of the things that I do.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, so I want to just set up this, because this is where I got hammered at the beginning of the pandemic talking about this is, I grew up working class. My parents grew up dirt poor. I mean, like, can't pay my electricity bill, so we just don't have electricity this month kind of thing. I grew up on basically commodity food. I totally have lived the life. I get that end of the economic spectrum. And I am not putting my energy, I'm not putting pressure on that group to shop local. If you can and you have the bandwidth for it, great. But I understand that you probably don't. Where I'm speaking to is the middle class parent that I am now, or the owning class parent, or the upper middle class parent, and somewhere in that spectrum. And I say that because when those people can tune into something different and start shopping in a way that's more conscientious, then we build the system that we want. Okay, because that's what seems to drive policy changes, is dollars, money. And so when big industries start to see that they're losing money because they suck, and they're hurting people, I mean, they're hurting people and the planet across the board in so many different ways. And when they start to understand that they're losing profit because people are catching on to that, then they have to change their practices. And this has happened multiple times over the course of our capitalist history. So I want to say that, so that people out there aren't thinking I'm just broadcasting the statement out there and it's for everybody and you have to do it or you're not worthy. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying all like, what is that all rising tide raises all boats kind of situation. So when you have the economic means to do something more conscientious, not out of convenience but more conscientious, then you're helping everybody else.
And that might change month to month. That might change day to day, right? Like I shop differently when I'm like, okay, what can I afford right now? What can I, it doesn't mean you have to always do the same thing all the time.
Exactly. And I mean, I have my own business, and some months are great, some months are terrible. And I'm like, oh my God, like, thank God for my husband's job. And that's where I'm at. That's my situation. And so, easy ways to do this. And I can only speak from the community that I live in now, but I also have I've done jobs, like I've catered jobs down in Nevada where I had to find food in the middle of nowhere. And I found local farmers who were selling vegetables in the deserts of Nevada. So it can be done no matter where you live, because I think that's a barrier for people. They're like, well, where do I find these people? And I'm like, we can find them. So there's that. But the time piece, for me, I'm pretty lucky because, like, I literally have a CSA shed drop off spot in my front yard. So they come and drop it off, and I just have to walk out and grab it.
Which is because you know the farmers. Let's just be clear. Like, this is because you know the farmers and you've set that up. You're like, this is important. Sure, use my property. Like, amazing, win-win. So just wanted to say that's not by accident.
Oh yeah, they asked me because I voted myself on as their marketing department, and I'm always talking about them and, hey, have you signed up, and da 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 da, all this stuff. But there are places in my town, and I know places in all over the place, Canada, America, wherever, where farmers have drop-off spots, and you go and you can order from them, and you can sign up for a CSA. It's the click of like 3 buttons. And online, they usually have a website, or you can talk to them directly. And then that way you have a plan, like you know what you're going to get. You're going to get this, this, and this, whatever they're growing. And, you know, in the nutrition space, people talk about variety, like they talk about making sure that you're getting all kinds of different plants. And I'm like, well, I think that we can really accomplish that by eating seasonally. I think that's check that box. Okay, so we did that. And now we're just going to pick this up one day a week. And, you know, sometimes for us here in Missoula, it's at a brewery. So if you like to have a beer with your, you know, you can bring your whole family, because in Montana, they allow kids in breweries. You can go and do that. And it can be a social thing, or it can just be grab and go, whatever. And it takes literally 20 minutes, which is faster than going into the grocery store. And honestly, because you're buying direct to consumer, it's cheaper. We think that grocery stores are only more affordable for some things because of the way that the subsidies program works. And it's usually they take profits from the commodity crops, and then they'll offset some of the other costs for other food at the grocery store. And it's kind of a lose-lose situation. I mean, what are you really getting there? Like I'm going to quote Vandana Shiva, who said, you know, eventually if we all keep shopping at these distribution centers, we're just going to be picking up empty biomass. We're just going to be buying empty biomass to put into our bodies. Okay, so the drop-off situation, working out a CSA, that stands for Community Supported Agriculture. And it is just a local farmer who says, I will grow crops from this point of the year to this point of the year. And you sign up, and every week I will bring a box of that food, and you can take it home and have it for the week for your family. And it's great. And then also for us, we've invested in a deep freezer. I'm going to be honest, we have 3 deep freezers, but this beyond the point. If you're just like, if you're stepping into this and you're like, how do I do this? You've got to find a way to store the stuff. And so for me, for meat, we have deep freezers where we store a beef, a pig, a lamb. I mean, I'm not going to go on here because we really do source a lot of protein. We need a storage spot for it. I don't enjoy going to like, you know, this part of town to get this meat and then over here to get the vegetables. Like I need it to be simple too. And so the deep freezers really kind of solve that problem of like, I tie in with the farm of the rancher or the chicken farmer, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to get a whole cow. And the thing is that people see that cost up front and their eyeballs bug out of their head because it is a big cost. It is a big cost up front for sure. And you know, not everybody has that disposable income to make you know, to make that sort of purchase, but a lot of people do. And I'm gonna say some things here that might make me unpopular, but we have to kind of, like we said in the beginning, you said in the beginning, about prioritizing what matters. Okay, so what do we sign our kids up for? All the things, and we are participating in this. We're making sure we go to Target so they have all the things and the clothes and the long list of things. Everything I buy, because I want to make sure that my money is going to things that move the needle for me so that I have the energy to show up and do the things that matter. And that all relates to basic foundational food choices. And so buying meat from a local rancher who I can talk to, and I can see their land, and I know they're not using chemicals on their animals or their land. I understand that meat is going to support my needs and the needs of my kids. It's not going to mess with their endocrine system because there's chemicals in it, you know, deposited in the fat tissue or anything like that. And so I think people just need the information and to understand that. I mean, how many women reach out to you and say, I've got hormonal imbalances? It's almost for me like all the time. I think it's my hormones. I'm like, well, maybe, you know, maybe it is, but or I'm concerned about my daughter, you know, going into puberty at age 8. You know, all of these things that are concerning to us. I'm like, this is a solution. This is a foundational solution of getting those endocrine disrupting chemicals out of your home environment. You can't control what's out there, but you can control what's here. So that's important. The other thing that's also really important here is that a lot of times if you really do have a budget, talk to a farmer or rancher and say, do you have any coal cows? Because a lot of times they'll have a cow that they can't sell because of food safety laws, because maybe the cow had like a crooked head or like a, I don't know, whatever, like a little hoof that didn't quite unfold correctly or whatever. And they will have a couple of cull cows that they have to figure out what to do with. And a lot of times they'll be the ones to eat them. But a lot of times they have surplus. And so if you talk to them and say, do you have a cull cow? Would I be able to purchase that from you? And they can sell it to you for a reduced price because it's not marketable. And that's important. The other thing that's really important is eating nose to tail. Like, people talk about this all the time. It gets thrown around because it's got a lot of micronutrients, but it's also very affordable. On my stovetop right now, I've got a bunch of beef tallow that's rendering out that I am going to send a quart of it to Stephanie Seneff, who came onto my podcast to talk about glyphosate. And we talked about beef tallow, we talked about pork lard as being important foods, sources of fat, as it relates especially to glyphosate. But this product that's rendering out is golden yellow orange. And the reason it is because the rancher has these beautiful biodiverse grasslands. These cows are making this huge contribution to that ecosystem by foraging and pooping and doing all the things they do. And I get this wonderful carotenoid rich, healthy fat source. And I'm going to share it with Stephanie Seneff. And it was $5, and it's going to amount to like 3 quarts of fat that will last me months and months and months. And it was $5. So I think we have to just, versus the big jug of olive oil that who even knows what that is anymore, from Costco. So that's the economic piece of just kind of shifting my mind. I can't just go grab it off the shelf. I do have to do a little work, but it's not labor intensive work. It's just on the stovetop. I'm not doing anything, and I will eventually strain out the solid parts and keep the liquid, which will turn into a solid fat at room temperature.
I'll add in a similar little hack is that if you're making whole chicken, gives you so much more bang for your buck in terms of the chicken. I mean, you can make 3 or 4 meals out of one chicken if you're using the chicken and you're using the organs. If the organs are inside the chicken cavity, even better, because you can use those, and then you can use the bones to make the stock. And then when you make your stock, and usually you can make, if it's a good chicken, you can make at least 2 batches out of that chicken, of those chicken bones, because as long as the bones are still, like, they're not mushy, there's still minerals in there, so you can reboil them for a sec, or simmer them for a second batch, and then the beautiful fat is going to rise to the top, and you can skim that off, and you can use that as some of your cooking fat. So it's really, like you say, it's not time intensive, but there is a learning curve to it. But once you have learned the thing, it's just part of what you do. Fermentation is the same thing. It doesn't take long, but you got to make the tea and put the SCOBY in to make the kombucha, or you got to put the grains in the milk, and you got to let it sit, and you have to not forget about it. Well, you can forget about it, but then you have to remember about it at some point. So it doesn't take a lot of time, but it does take a little bit of a decision, like you say. It's a decision to do it. So it's taking up a little bit of your energy real estate in your energy bank account, but it is going to actually save you money. With the food, but also in your health costs, in your healthcare costs, and how many supplements you need to buy, and how many medical visits you need, right?
100%. And I think that's the other part of that, is that, people will balk at the cost of real food, but at the same time miss the mark when they fail to remember that, oh yeah, all of January I couldn't work because I had 2 sick kids at home, or 3 sick kids at home, or a whole house of sick people. We forget that. And then we also forget that, doctor visits cost a lot of money, and health problems cost a lot of money, and supplements cost a lot of money. And I think that, I'm not against supplements at all. I take supplements myself, but I have to check it before I wreck it, because supplements are expensive, and getting more so. I mean, it's taking on very a similar role of the pharmaceutical industry. And it's kind of just like, oh, bummer, And that's just part of our conditioning. People just want to take the thing in the bottle and the pills and fix it. But if we're not getting those nutrients in our diet, we have to ask ourselves why, and how can I change that? And it really does. I mean, I think I know I said at the beginning of this episode, I don't want anyone to misconstrue me for somebody that loves making dinner. Don't don't misread this, people. Like, I am not somebody that loves spending my time in the kitchen, doing dishes, cleaning up. But what I do love is a meal that nourishes me. A meal that gives my kids things they're not going to get anywhere else. It's my job. I have to do it. And I also love, I mean, as my kids are getting busier and things are just getting busier, I will cancel plans because I love the dinner time experience with my kids so much. That is the time of day where we sit down. We're not worried about whether they're going to eat. That's not where we're at. That's not true for everybody. Some people are in that situation where they're trying to figure out, like, how do I enjoy your company after you have just railed on me for an hour about what we're eating? Like, some people are in that spot, but I'm going to tell you that there is hope. You just stick with it, but remember your why. I love my kids. I'm doing this out of love. I'm not doing this because I'm the authoritarian here and you will do what I say, because I think that's so old school. That's so our parents' generation. Um, but I love that time at the dinner table with my children. I love making eye contact with them. I love hearing about their days. We laugh with each other. We have a good time at dinner in my house, and there is just no denying it. It is precious, valuable time that cannot be replaced with anything else. And so I just really want to put that in people's lap, that's the finish. I mean, I think that really kind of is a big finish line of you make it through all the gauntlet of trying to, what are the things we need to eat, and how am I going to get my kids to eat these things, and do I have the time for the cleanup and the prepping and all the stuff? Once you get through all of that, integrating all those things, the golden nugget there is the time and connection you spend with kids who are regulated and you're regulated. And then the meal gets to be about connecting and enjoying each other. And I just can't emphasize enough how beautiful and precious that is. And I think ultimately, on a deep core level, every parent knows that's what they want. They know that. And they know they're in the situation. Yeah, it is possible. And they know that they're in the spot to make the decisions, to do the hard things, to walk through the fire and all of that. And once you get to the other side, it's just golden. I mean, you get to have the kind of relationships with your kids that you have always wanted before you even made the decision to have the kids. I mean, for me, that was I was like, oh, I just have this vision of having a family where we like each other and we're connected, which, I mean, to be honest, was not really my experience growing up. And so I just cherish this time with my family. It's healing for me. So yeah, I can't emphasize it enough.
I think the fastest path, I think all of the things, I mean, we've gone on so many topics here, but I think the fastest path to that vision of loveliness that you just painted, of having a good time with good, nourishing food, liking each other, which, like you say, feels out of reach for a lot of parents. The fastest path there wraps right back to what we talked about around curiosity and connection, and that our kids we need to have time for our kids. They want to be listened to, they want to be heard, getting curious about their bodies and helping them, make healthy choices without foisting our version of healthy choices onto them, being collaborative with them while also being a strong leader for them, and modeling healthy decision making, and modeling how you're prioritizing your time. It's all doable. I think sometimes it starts with a conversation with your parenting partner, or a conversation with yourself, if it's just you, around the aspects of life, and how much energy and money you want to spend on different aspects of life. What are your priorities? And rejigging a little bit, if you have found that food has fallen off the radar and there's no longer time for family dinners, and you're grabbing things from here and there, and you're no longer connected with food systems, or with where this food even came from, or what it even is. Maybe it's time to rethink. Maybe it's time to just sort of take a pause, and reconsider where priorities are. And it's always shiftable. Sometimes It's easier to shift it if you're in the earlier stages of raising your family, but it's always shiftable.
Oh my gosh. Absolutely. And I have a handful of clients who have asked me to come over and talk to their teenage children about why, as as a way of helping them bring those changes into the household. And the message is always, this generation of young people really has the only rational feeling that they should have around ultra processed junk food is anger, because they literally are walking around with a bullseye on their back. And when they start to clue into all of the different ways that they have been, tricked and hoodwinked by the food industry, they're like, oh my God, they're angry about it. I think that it's really important to acknowledge that it's so much easier to prevent chronic disease than it is to treat it. Okay. So, like, we have to remember, like, one line I say to my children all the time, who one of their biggest chief complaints is, like, when we're the family that's eating liver and heart, and they're like, I just want to be normal. Normal is not a good goal. I've been very, very, very clear, and from the entire time that we have sorted through what we do at our house, is that normal is not a good goal. I'm like, look around you. How many kids in your classroom have to take medication? How many kids in your classroom can't sit through class? This is all directly related to what's happening with their physiology inside their gut, and it's affecting their brain. And they are on board with it now. They get it. And I think the pandemic was a very elucidating in terms of seeing the shift with kids, and they saw it themselves with their own eyes. I went and worked in the schools during the pandemic, because I kind of just, like, I kept my kids at home for a year, and then the second year, we lived so close to the school, I can hear the school bell ring, so they could hear kids playing, and it was just a hard sell. So I was like, okay, you can go back to school. And they were masking, and all of these things, all these protocols were in place. So I wanted to go to the school and work in their school so that I could see them and hug them and, like, make eye contact with them and just have a little more connection with them. And I was just 2 days a week, and I went in as subbed. But what I saw was so dramatically different during that time than it was before the pandemic. Kids' inability to regulate their emotions, and it hasn't shifted. We haven't shifted back. Some kids recovered some things, but a lot of kids did not. And it's still the same way at school, where any given day of the week, you can go into any public school. And I mean, I live in an upper middle class neighborhood where these families are doing well financially, but they're not doing well with their health. And their kids, it's showing up on their kids in terms of, like, as a autism spectrum disorder and ADHD and, all of the things. Any given day of the week, you walk into the school and hear a kid screaming, where there are now additional interventionists at school to help kids manage emotions. And to be honest with you, they're not doing it effectively because they're not treating the root cause. Unless we get to the root cause, it's not going to shift.
And the root is a dysregulated nervous system, right? Which is what I'm always talking about. So what dysregulates the nervous system? All of the things. But what do we do about it as parents? We get back to the basics. We get back to the real nourishing food, getting sufficient sleep, feeding the gut microbiome, all of the things that we're talking about on this podcast. It seems very complicated when you're looking at your kid and you're like, what the heck is going on with you? It's a really interesting feedback that we're getting from your body right now, like all of the things that we've talked about, and just coming back to, okay, they need extra nourishment when they're dysregulated. So, go back to episode 1 of season 2, where we talk about the core nourishment needs, and just go look for the low-hanging fruit and do what's doable, and your child's system will shift and will start to calm down. Jessie Thomas, I could talk to you forever, but we should wrap it up. Where can people find you and learn more from you?
I'm on Instagram. I am Sustainable Wellness, and you can find me on the internet at www.sustainablewellness.net. And reach out to me over any of the access points there, and I will always reply to people. And yeah, thank you for having me on. I'm looking forward to hoping that we can Swiss cheese our schedules and find a way to make it through the shoot, so I can have you on to talk about a specific topic that I would love to pick your brain on. So
For sure. There's lots to talk about. I hope everybody got at least a glimmer of something, and we can continue. I always like to continue the conversation in the comments of just, one little thing that you might want to do to make your life a little bit easier while still being nourishing is that's what we're after. So thank you for coming and sharing your wisdom.
Thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe. And if you feel called to, share it with another family who needs to hear it. There are more tools from me at jesssherman.com/learn and jesssherman.com/membership, alongside all the great resources you'll find at EcoParent. Things are changing for kids, and the more we come together in conversation as parents, the more we can find ease and joy as we raise the next generation together. I look forward to seeing you back here next time. Until then, keep at it. You have the most important job in the world.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed the episode. If so, please consider leaving a review and subscribing to the podcast. If you think this podcast is great, our host, Jess Sherman, has condensed everything you need to know to nourish your family into a truly fantastic 7-hour video course. You can learn more at ecoparent.ca/learn. It will change the way you think about feeding your family. You might also be interested in our Kids Wellness course, taught by Dr. Leslie Solomonia. As a thank you for listening, I'd like to offer you a 15% discount on any one of our online courses or any subscription to EcoParent magazine. Just head on over to ecoparent.ca, hit the Eco Shop button in the navigation bar, and use code FEEDING15 at checkout. All caps, no spaces, that's FEEDING15. Till next time.